So we are continuing this series that we've been doing on the 10 commandments, and I'm excited to continue this and talk about the fifth commandment, which comes from Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Honor your father and mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. So join me on this episode of the Methodical Methodist Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Methodical Methodist Podcast, a podcast where we talk about why the church is still relevant for us today as we explore themes connected to religion, politics, pop culture, faith, and yes, even the church. Together we can find out what it means to live into the mission of the church by making disciples. Now, let's get methodical. This fifth commandment is the first commandment that deals with human relationships, but it also says something about our relationship with God. One scholar notes that the ancient rabbis split the two tablets of the 10 Commandments into two categories. The first tablet contained laws that had to do with our relationship with God. The second tablet contained laws that have to do with our relationship with other humans. The ancient rabbis placed the fifth commandment on the first tablet, because for children, parents stand in the place of God. Our parents are the ones who give us life. They are essentially co-creators with God, who is the ultimate creator. In Genesis, humans were told to be fruitful and multiply. In Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14, it says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." Parenthood is a gift from God. Our parents teach us important lessons in life. Therefore, we are called to honor our father and mother. But first, we must ask the question, what does it mean to honor your father and mother? Honor means reverence, respect, esteem, and admiration. Many of us want to honor and please our parents. We want our parents to be proud of who we are and the people that we have become. But here's the thing. It's easy to honor your parents when they are worth honoring. But some parents don't always seem worth honoring. Some parents are gone, absent, they're too busy to spend time with their children. Unfortunately, some parents are even abusive. And it's because of these reasons that some people have trouble referring to God as Father because of how their earthly father treated them. How do we honor parents who aren't worth honoring? One scholar suggests that this commandment doesn't ask that we exhibit warm sentiments that come from greeting cards to our parents. It doesn't even say, love your parent. Rather, it says we honor them. This commandment doesn't say honor your parents if they deserve it, or honor your parents to the degree that they deserve it. It simply says honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land of the Lord your God is giving you. Notice that it says honor your parents so that you will live a long, full life. This commandment teaches that honoring your parents can be more beneficial to the child than it could be to the parent. And as I kind of thought about this, it made me think one question. Maybe one way to honor our parents is to live a better life than how we were raised. Maybe following this commandment is a way for children to strive to be better parents than what their own parents were. On the flip side, perhaps this commandment tells parents to be fathers and mothers worth honoring. I think this is a challenge, not just for children, but also for parents too. Are you doing enough to show love and respect to your children? Are you being a parent that is worth honoring? I think parents have a great responsibility to raise their children, especially when those children are younger. And parents are tasked with equipping, leading, and teaching their children. That could not be more true than it is today with all of the things going on with this pandemic. But as Proverbs 22:6 says, Train children in the right way, and when old, they will not stray. Studies show that if both parents attend church regularly, 72% of their children remain faithful in attendance as adults. If only the father attends regularly, 55% remain faithful. If only the mother attends regularly, that percentage drops to 15%. And if neither attends regularly, only 6% of children will attend church as adults. It's amazing how this commandment of honoring our parents happens in stages. We honor our parents as children, we honor them as youth and young adults, and then, of course, we honor them even as we become adults. And I really like how Stanley and Howard Wallace and Will Willman talk about how adults care for their parents. They write, "As adults, we who have received care from our parents now get to care for them. We who have had our diapers changed by parents without feeling at the time any gratitude get to offer our thanks by changing their diapers. Honoring our fathers and mothers, obeying this commandment, becomes a very mundane, practical, bodily matter in the extended care ward of a nursing home." There are some developing nations where parents consider it a blessing to have large families because when they grow old, their children will be able to take care of them. They'll have enough children that can all pitch in and take care of them. At least that's the hope, that their children will take care of them. But this sentiment goes along with a story from the Grimm brothers, and it's kind of a grim story, really. But there was once a very old man who had become blind and hard of hearing. His knees trembled, and when he sat at the table, he could hardly hold the spoon. He would spill the broth all over the tablecloth or let it run out of his mouth. And so his son and his son's wife were disgusted at this, and so the old man was forced to sit in the corner behind the stove. The son and the son's wife gave him his food in a stoneware bowl, but they didn't even give him enough to fill it up. He used to look toward the table with his eyes full of tears, and then one day his trembling hands could not hold the bowl, and it fell to the ground and broke. And the young wife scolded him, saying, "If you are a pig, you must eat out of a trough." And so they actually made him this little wooden trough, and he was forced to eat out of it. And then one day, the man and the wife's 4-year-old son started gathering pieces of wood, and the father asked, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the little boy said, "I am making a little trough for you and Mama to eat out of when I get big like you." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while, and then they actually started to cry. They then took the old grandfather to the table, and they let him eat with them, and they never said a word if he spilled anything. I think that's a pretty interesting story that tells us about how we treat others and the importance, and not only treating our parents with honor, but treating everyone with respect and honor. A couple of years ago, I went to a funeral of a woman in one of the churches that I used to serve. And it was a really beautiful and touching service. And I think the reason that it was so touching is because the woman's son was the one who spoke at the funeral. And he paid tribute to his mother. And it's especially touching because over the past several years before this, he had cared for his mother, who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And he spoke of how she had raised him and cared for him. And toward the end of her life, he was the one who was caring for her instead. And he spoke of how he could honor his mother by continuing to live up to the person that his mother raised him to be. So maybe you think about this commandment, honor your mother and father, and you think, okay, great, but my parents have passed on. Well, one way that you can honor your parent is by continuing to uphold the lessons that they have taught you in the past. Those family values can teach us a lot about life and how we should live out our faith. But Jesus says some difficult things when it comes to family values. Jesus strayed from his parents when he visited the temple as a child. His parents were concerned because they weren't able to find him, and when they finally went back and found him at the temple, his parents get on to him and they say, hey, we've been looking around for you. We've been worried. But Jesus simply replies, didn't you know that I would be in my Father's house? Then there was that time that Jesus told a man to follow him, and the man says, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus says, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God. And of course, we can't forget about that time that Jesus called for his followers to hate their father and mother, their wife and children, their brothers and sisters, and even their own life. And if they don't do those things, then they can't be his disciple. As Lance Pape states, any way you slice it, Jesus is no champion of family values. He has kingdom values, and these are often not the same thing. It's remarkable how many stories depict Jesus in conflict with his own family, or as a source of conflict in families. He insists that his followers prioritize the kingdom of God and God's righteousness. There's one particular story in the Gospels that shows Jesus' allegiance to kingdom values over family values. Jesus is in a crowded home teaching about the kingdom of God, and while he's teaching, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Jesus' siblings are all waiting outside, and they call for him. And some poor soul is tasked with having to go in there and send Jesus this message saying, Jesus, your family would like a word with you. That's never a good sign. Anytime somebody says, hey, we need to talk, that's usually not a good thing. But Jesus doesn't seem too concerned about meeting with his family. Instead, Jesus addresses the crowd and he says, who is my family? Whoa, it's a bit of a slap in the face. It's a bit of a harsh statement. This doesn't really go along with our normal and pious picture of Jesus. Doesn't Jesus know that you're supposed to follow this commandment, honor your mother and father? But Jesus goes on to answer that question, who is my family, by saying, anyone who does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. Now, I'm a good 90s kid. I grew up in the 90s, and so I know that family is important. And I say that because in the 90s, there were all these great family shows like Family Matters, Full House, Home Improvement, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, all of those shows that taught that the most important thing in the world is your family. To have those family values, to have those family morals. And that's what the clear message was in all of those television shows. But when I was in middle school, we had this guest speaker come in and talk to my class, and I can still remember exactly what he said. It was so weird. He said, I would do anything for my family. If my family was starving, then I would steal from you. If you were hurting my family, then I would kill you. And I remember thinking, this is an odd thing to say to a bunch of middle schoolers. But I looked around at the rest of my classmates and I realized that most of them were just kind of nodding along in agreement, almost as if they were saying, yeah, me too. I would murder, I would steal if it was about my family. I guess for some, the 10 Commandments are not absolute. Some think that thou shalt not steal or thou shalt not murder only apply when family is not involved. For so many, family is of supreme importance. For most of us, family is good. It's not a bad thing. But for some folks, families, offer up a lot of sad and hard images. There's been a lot of sinful and sad things that have happened in families before. And so in our text, Jesus kind of blurs the lines of who is considered our family. What's kind of sad is that in this story that I've talked about with Jesus and his family, I'm sure Jesus' family loved him, but I'm not so sure that they fully understood him. I don't think they fully understood it, at least at that point, what Jesus' mission was in the world. Jesus came not just to honor his mother and father, but really to expand what family is, the meaning of family, to expand God's family. And he did that showing us that Jesus came to include all people. And I think this is where it gets difficult because most everybody loves their family. And of course they do, because for the most part, your family looks like you and perhaps even thinks like you. So of course, anybody would love their own family because your family is really an extension of you. But what would you do to help that poor woman who is begging on the street and has no relation to you? What would you do to help that young man who is struggling with drug addiction? It's so easy to say, well, that's not my problem. It's so easy to ignore those in need and say, I have my own family to worry about. I don't have time to worry about other people. But life with Jesus forces us to look beyond our own wants, needs, desires, and even our own family. In our baptism, we're placed in a family that is much bigger than what you might think. When we recite the Lord's Prayer, we come together and we utter those words at the very beginning, Our Father. And we do this because it's not just my Father, it's not just your Father, but it's our Father, and we have all been adopted into the family of God. I was in elementary school when I first met Miss Marlene. For all of my life, my grandparents had been taking care of my great-grandmother up until this point, and she had not been doing well. So my grandparents hired Miss Marlene to take care of my great-grandmother. Each day she would come and help feed and care for my great-grandmother until eventually she passed away. And it wasn't long after that when Miss Marlene herself became very sick. My grandparents did not hesitate to take her into their own home. Miss Marlene did not have much, but she was one of the most generous people I had ever met. She sent me money for all of my birthdays. She always had a Christmas present for me and all of my cousins. She was kind and helpful and sweet, and we all loved her. Her own family had pretty much abandoned her. So when she died after a few years of being sick, it was my grandparents who paid for the funeral. And I can remember my grandfather wearing a suit for the first time in my life. I don't think I'd ever seen him in a suit before then. And he said, I don't wear a suit for just anybody, but I'll wear one for Marlene. My grandparents brought her into our family because they realized something important. We weren't related by blood, but we were related by Jesus. How can you be a family member to those who you are not related to by blood, but you are related to them solely through Jesus? God longs for us to commune together. We are told to honor our father and mother, but in the words of Jesus, who is my family? We are all members of God's family. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Methodical Methodist Podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, I hope you might consider heading on over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review of the show. It is very much appreciated. And until next time, stay methodical.